I stood in our kitchen, adjusting my tie one last time before our 15th anniversary dinner. The candles were lit, the wine was breathing, and Romano's had our usual table waiting. 15 years of marriage deserved celebration, or so I thought. My phone buzzed. Coraline's name flashed on the screen. Eldric, I'm so sorry. Her voice crackled through the speaker. Something urgent came up at work. I can't make dinner tonight. I stared at the anniversary card I'd written that morning, sitting beside 24 red roses. Urgent? On our anniversary? You know how important this client is. We'll do something special this weekend, I promise. The line went dead. I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I'd been saving and sat in our empty dining room. The silence felt heavier than usual. Outside, couples walked hand in hand toward restaurants, celebrating their own moments. I couldn't remember the last time Coraline looked at me the way those women looked at their partners. When did we stop being a team? When had I become just another item on her schedule, easily canceled when something better came along? The roses seemed to mock me from across the table. 2 days later, I came home early from the architecture firm. The house felt different, filled with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. Coraline's laughter echoed from the living room, rich and genuine. I paused at the doorway, listening to her voice through her phone call. Harlan, you're terrible, she giggled, the same laugh she used to give me during our early dating years. I can't believe you said that to the waiter. My stomach dropped. I'd never heard her mention anyone named Harlan. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Eldric's always buried in his blueprints anyway. Her voice carried a tenderness that had disappeared from our conversations years ago. I know, baby. I miss you too. I quietly backed away from the room and climbed the stairs to my office. My hands shook as I closed the door behind me. Baby. She called him baby. She hadn't called me that since our honeymoon. I sat at my desk, staring at the family photos scattered across its surface. In every picture, Coraline's smile looked forced when she stood next to me. Had I been blind to it all this time? The house suddenly felt like a theater, and I was the only one who didn't know I was in a play. Sabra knocked on our door the following Saturday morning, her usual entitled smile plastered across her face. Coraline's younger sister had never worked a day in her life, bouncing between our guest room and whatever boyfriend would support her lifestyle. Is Cora here? She asked, pushing past me into the hallway. She's at the gym, I replied, though I suspected she wasn't exercising. Sabra collapsed onto our couch, already making herself at home. You know, Eldric, you're really lucky. I raised an eyebrow. Lucky how? Well, you're lucky Coraline has Harlan now, or you'd still be her emotional crutch. She said it casually, like commenting on the weather. At least now she has someone who actually understands her ambitions. The words hit me like a physical blow. I kept my expression neutral, years of client meetings having taught me to hide my emotions. Harlan, I asked carefully. Sabra's eyes widened, realizing her mistake. I just meant. But the damage was done. She'd confirmed what I'd suspected since that phone call. My wife's sister saw me as nothing more than a safety net, someone to catch Coraline when her real life didn't work out. I excused myself and went to my office, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The confrontation came that evening. I'd spent all day building up courage, and when Coraline returned from her gym session, with her hair suspiciously perfect, I was ready. We need to talk, I said as she hung up her jacket. She sighed dramatically. Can it wait? I'm exhausted. From what? Your workout with Harlan. The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked genuinely surprised. Then something cold settled in her eyes. So you know, she said simply. I know enough. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Coraline laughed, but there was no humor in it. What about it? Eldric, let me make this simple for you. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt like shouting. You were never the choice. You were just the placeholder until someone better came along. Harlan is that someone. The words hung in the air between us like poison. I'd expected denial, maybe tears, certainly some remorse. Instead, she looked relieved to finally say what she'd apparently been thinking for years. 15 years, I whispered. 15 years of settling, she corrected. But not anymore. She walked upstairs, leaving me standing in our hallway, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing our marriage with new eyes. The signs had been there all along, hidden in plain sight like architectural flaws in a beautiful building. At her company's holiday party last year, she'd introduced me to her colleagues as simply Eldric, never my husband. I'd thought she was being professional. Now I realized she was being ashamed. Our family photos had slowly disappeared from her office. When I asked about them, she claimed she wanted a cleaner workspace. The truth was clearer now. She was erasing me from her public life. Her career had always taken precedence over our plans. Vacations canceled for meetings, anniversaries postponed for client dinners. I'd supported her ambitions, thinking I was being a good husband. Instead, I'd been making myself invisible. At dinner parties, she'd talk about her future as if I wasn't part of it. When I make a partner, never when we achieve our goals. Her dreams had pronouns that didn't include me. I found myself studying our wedding photos, looking for signs I'd missed. Even then, her smile seemed directed just past the camera, as if she was looking toward a future that didn't include the man standing beside her. The invisible husband. That's what I'd become, a ghost in my own marriage. I started investigating quietly, using skills I'd learned managing construction budgets and contractor payments. Money leaves trails, and Coraline has left plenty. Our joint account showed regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. When I traced it, I found it belonged to Harlan Stevens, a marketing executive at a competing firm. The amounts were substantial, enough to cover his rent, car payments, and expensive dinners. Gift purchases appeared on her credit card statements. Watches, jewelry, weekend trips to wine country. None of these gifts had come home to me. Most interesting was Sabra's situation. Her rent, which she'd claimed to struggle with for months, was being paid directly from Coraline's personal account. My wife was supporting her sister's lazy lifestyle while planning to abandon our marriage. I photographed everything, creating a detailed timeline of financial infidelity. Each transfer was dated, each gift documented. The pattern was clear. Coraline had been funding her new life for almost a year. She'd used our marital assets to finance her affair, probably thinking I'd never notice. After all, the placeholder husband wasn't supposed to pay attention to important things like money. But architects notice details. It's what we do for a living. Attorney Leora Greaves had a reputation for being ruthless in divorce cases. Her office walls displayed awards and newspaper clippings about high-profile victories. She was exactly what I needed. "Tell me everything," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. I spread out my documentation across her desk. Bank statements, credit card records, photos of receipts. The paper trail of my wife's betrayal laid out like blueprints for a building I never wanted to construct. Leora studied the documents with the intensity of a surgeon examining x-rays. After 20 minutes, she looked up with a smile that made me slightly nervous. "Your wife has made several critical mistakes," she said. "Using marital assets to fund an affair is considered financial misconduct. Supporting her sister while planning to abandon you shows deliberate deception. And this." She held up a credit card statement. "This shows a pattern of hiding assets." "What does that mean for me?" "It means if she wants a war, we'll give her the kind she never recovers from." Her smile widened. "She played you for a fool, Eldric. Now we're going to show her what a fool actually looks like." I left her office feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not hope for reconciliation, but hope for justice. Coraline's company was hosting their annual client appreciation dinner at the Grandview Hotel. She'd mentioned it weeks ago, back when she still pretended I mattered. Now she assumed I'd stay home like the good placeholder husband. Instead, I put on my best suit and arrived fashionably late. The ballroom was filled with Coraline's colleagues and their biggest clients. I spotted her immediately, wearing the red dress I'd bought her last Christmas, standing with a tall man I recognized from social media photos. "Harlan." I approached the bar and ordered a whiskey, making sure to catch the bartender's attention with friendly conversation. Within minutes, several people had noticed me and were whispering among themselves. "Eldric." Coraline's voice came from behind me, tight with panic. "What are you doing here?" I turned with my warmest smile. "Supporting my wife's career, of course. Isn't that what husbands do?" Harlan approached, looking confused. He was younger than me, with the kind of confident swagger that comes from never being told no. "And you must be Harlan." I extended my hand warmly. "I've heard so much about you. Coraline talks about you constantly at home." The color drained from both their faces. Around us, conversations quieted as people sensed drama. "It's wonderful to finally meet the man who's been such a close friend to my wife. 3 weeks later, Coraline hosted a dinner party at our house for her work friends. I played the perfect host, serving drinks and making polite conversation while she tried to manage the social dynamics. Sabra arrived fashionably late and immediately headed for the wine. By the third glass, her filter had completely disappeared. "Cora, when are you going to show me that condo?" she asked loudly, interrupting a conversation about quarterly projections. Coraline's eyes went wide. "Sabra, maybe we should discuss this later." "Why?" "Everyone here knows you're leaving Eldric anyway." Sabra waved her wine glass carelessly. "You promised me that downtown condo once you got rid of him. When's that happening?" The room went silent. Coraline's colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. I kept my phone recording in my pocket, capturing every slurred word as Sabra continued her drunken rambling about Coraline's plans to upgrade from the placeholder and move in with her real man. "Sabra, you're drunk," Coraline hissed. "So? You said it yourself. Eldric was never permanent. Just someone to pay bills until Harlan was ready to commit." I excused myself to get more ice, but I'd heard enough. In her wine-loosened tongue, Sabra had just handed me ammunition I could never have gathered myself. Sometimes the best evidence comes from the people who don't realize they're confessing. I started making changes quietly, the same way Coraline had built her secret life. Small moves that wouldn't attract attention until it was too late. The investment account we'd built for retirement was in both our names, but I was the primary account holder. I shifted it to a different firm, one that required both signatures for any major withdrawals. Coraline rarely paid attention to investment statements anyway. Our joint savings account had accumulated a substantial balance over the years. I opened a new personal account and began transferring money in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger alerts. 500 here, 800 there. Nothing dramatic, but steady. The house was in both our names, but I'd made all the down payment from my inheritance. I quietly consulted with a real estate attorney about my options. Most importantly, I stopped contributing to the joint account that funded Coraline's lifestyle. Instead, I opened a separate checking account for my salary. Let her wonder why there was suddenly less money available for her expensive tastes. She was so focused on her relationship with Harlan that she didn't notice our financial foundation slowly shifting beneath her feet. Every architect knows that the strongest buildings are destroyed from the foundation up, not from the roof down. I started researching Harlan Stevens more thoroughly, treating him like a contractor I was considering for a major project. What I found was fascinating. Harlan worked for Morrison Marketing, a direct competitor to Coraline's firm. More interesting was his employment history. He'd been passed over for promotion 3 times in the past 2 years. His performance reviews, which I found through a friend who worked in HR consulting, painted a picture of someone ambitious but lacking substance. His social media presence was carefully curated to suggest success, but the details didn't add up. The expensive restaurants he photographed were paid for with Coraline's money. The luxury weekend trips were funded by her credit card. Most revealing was a conversation I overheard when I called his office pretending to be a potential client. His colleague mentioned that Harlan was always talking about landing a big fish and networking his way to the top. The pieces clicked together. Harlan wasn't just having an affair with my wife. He was using her, her position, her money, her connections. He saw her the same way she saw me, as a stepping stone to something better. I almost felt sorry for Coraline. She thought she'd found her prince, but she'd actually found someone just as calculating as herself. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala was the social event of the season. Coraline had been planning to attend with Harlan, presenting him as her business associate, while I stayed home like a good placeholder. Instead, I bought a ticket and arrived alone. The auction was already underway when I spotted them at a table near the front. Coraline wore the diamond earrings I'd given her for our 10th anniversary, while Harlan had his hand possessively on her shoulder. The auctioneer introduced a beautiful landscape painting that I knew Coraline had admired in art magazines. The bidding started at $5,000. Harlan raised his paddle confidently, bidding $8,000. He glanced around the room with the swagger of someone spending money he hadn't earned. I waited until the bidding reached $12,000 before raising my paddle. Harlan's head whipped around, his eyes widening when he saw me. We engaged in a silent war, paddles rising back and forth. 15,000, 18,000, 22,000. I could see sweat beading on Harlan's forehead as the numbers climbed beyond his reach. 25,000, I called out clearly. The room went silent. Harlan's paddle stayed down. Sold to paddle number 47. I walked to the front to claim my purchase, then made a point of approaching Coraline's table. Congratulations on the painting, she said stiffly. I smiled warmly. Actually, I'm donating it to Pierce & Associates, her biggest competitor. I thought they'd appreciate good art. The fallout from the charity gala was swift and brutal. Coraline's colleagues had witnessed her business associate bidding against her husband, then watched me publicly humiliate them both by donating the painting to their rival firm. At Monday morning's board meeting, the questions started immediately. Coraline, there seems to be some confusion about your relationship with Harlan Stevens, said board member Victoria Walsh. Several of our clients were asking questions at the gala. I wasn't present for the meeting, but my friend Thomas, who worked in their accounting department, filled me in later. Coraline had tried to explain Harlan as a potential business partner, but the board wasn't buying it. The optics are problematic, another board member had said, especially given his employment with our competitor. When they asked directly if she was having an affair, Coraline had apparently fumbled the answer, neither confirming nor denying it convincingly. The board's trust in her judgment was shaken. How could they rely on someone to make good business decisions when her personal life was so obviously compromised? For the first time in years, Coraline's position wasn't secure, and I wasn't there to defend her or smooth things over like I always had before. The placeholder husband had checked out of his supporting role. Sabra showed up at my office on a rainy Thursday afternoon, looking desperate in a way I'd never seen before. Her usual confident swagger had been replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Eldric, I need to talk to you," she said, pushing past my secretary into my private office. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What can I do for you, Sabra?" "It's about the money," she began, then stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "Coraline said she's having some temporary cash flow issues. My rent is due tomorrow, and she can't cover it this month." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "I see. And you're here because?" "Because you're family," she said desperately. "We've always been able to count on each other, right?" The irony was staggering. The same woman who'd called me a placeholder was now asking for my help because her real source of support had dried up. "How much do you need?" I asked. Her face lit up with relief. "Just 1,800. I'll pay you back as soon as Coraline sorts out her situation." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my wallet. Sabra's eyes widened with hope as I counted out bills. $20. 40. 60. Bus fare to your mother's house in Oregon, I said, sliding the money across the desk. "That's all the family support you're getting from me." The recording of Sabra's drunken confession had been sitting in my phone for weeks, waiting for the right moment. That moment came when I learned that Coraline was up for a major promotion that would make her the youngest partner in her firm's history. I sent the audio file to 3 people: Victoria Walsh from the board, Thomas in accounting who I knew would share it discreetly, and Coraline's assistant who handled her schedule and had access to important meetings. The recording was damning. Sabra's slurred voice talking about the placeholder husband and real man Harlan painted a picture of a woman who had no respect for her marriage or her colleagues' intelligence. Within hours, the audio had made its way through the office. Coraline's reputation for professionalism crumbled as people heard her sister casually discussing her affair and her plans to abandon her marriage for financial gain. The board called an emergency meeting. Instead of discussing her promotion, they were now questioning her judgment, her integrity, and her ability to represent the firm's values. "How can we trust someone who's been living a lie?" Victoria Walsh apparently asked during the meeting. Coraline tried to control the damage, claiming the recording was taken out of context. But Sabra's words were too clear, too detailed, too damaging. The promotion that should have been hers was quietly shelved indefinitely. I'd been watching the downtown condo market for months, not because I wanted to move, but because I knew Coraline had been promising Sabra one of the units. When the perfect property came available, I moved quickly. The seller was motivated, and I had cash available from the investments I'd been quietly liquidating. The deal closed in 3 weeks, with the deed in my name only. I was having coffee at a cafe across the street when Coraline and Sabra arrived for their viewing appointment. Through the window, I watched them approach the building with excitement, Sabra practically bouncing as she imagined her new home. The confusion on their faces when the realtor explained the property was no longer available was priceless. I watched them argue on the sidewalk, Coraline's calm professionalism cracking as Sabra's voice rose in accusation. My phone buzzed with a text from Coraline. The condo we were looking at sold. Do you know anything about this? I typed back. I bought it yesterday. Seemed like a good investment. The silence that followed was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. For once, I was the one making moves she couldn't anticipate or control. Sabra was probably realizing that her promised luxury lifestyle had just evaporated, and Coraline was learning that the placeholder husband still had a few surprises left. The divorce papers were served at Coraline's office on a busy Tuesday morning, ensuring maximum visibility among her colleagues. I wasn't being vindictive. I just wanted to make sure she couldn't spin the narrative to her advantage. Our first court hearing was scheduled for the following month. Leora had prepared our case with the thoroughness of a master architect designing a skyscraper. Every document was organized, every piece of evidence was cataloged, and every argument was supported by facts. Coraline arrived with her attorney, looking confident in her expensive suit. That confidence evaporated when Leora began presenting our evidence. The financial records showing her use of marital assets to fund her affair. The gifts purchased for Harlan with joint account money. The regular transfers to Sabra's account while she planned to abandon our marriage. Your Honor, Leora said calmly, Mrs. Vance has systematically used marital resources to finance her extramarital relationship while deceiving her husband about her intentions. This represents a clear case of financial misconduct. Coraline's attorney tried to argue that these were normal expenses, but the judge wasn't convinced. The pattern was too obvious, the deception too calculated. Mrs. Vance, the judge said sternly, these records suggest a deliberate attempt to deplete marital assets while planning to end the marriage. This court takes such misconduct very seriously. For the first time in months, Coraline looked genuinely worried. Harlan's departure was as calculated as his arrival had been. I learned about it through Thomas, who'd heard it from someone at Morrison Marketing. Apparently, Harlan had been keeping his options open throughout his relationship with Coraline. When her reputation started crumbling and her financial situation became uncertain, he began distancing himself from what he now saw as a sinking ship. The final straw was the divorce proceedings. Harlan realized that being associated with Coraline's scandal could damage his own career prospects. He quietly started avoiding her calls and canceling their dates. Coraline tried to maintain dignity, but her colleagues noticed when she began eating lunch alone and leaving work early. The confident woman who'd once commanded boardrooms was now checking her phone constantly, waiting for messages that never came. When she finally confronted Harlan directly, he gave her the same treatment she'd given me. Cold honesty delivered without mercy. You're toxic right now, he'd apparently told her. I can't be associated with this mess. The man she'd called her real choice had shown his true colors. He was just as opportunistic as she was, but smarter about protecting himself when things went wrong. Coraline was learning what it felt like to be discarded by someone you trusted. Victoria Walsh had been Coraline's mentor for 5 years, guiding her career and advocating for her advancement within the firm. Their relationship made Victoria's betrayal even more devastating. I encountered Victoria at a coffee shop near the courthouse after one of our hearings. She approached me with the awkwardness of someone who had something important to say. Eldric, I owe you an apology, she began. I never realized what Coraline was really like until all this came out. She told me about conversations she'd had with Coraline over the years, times when my wife had mocked my small dreams and limited ambition to her colleagues. According to Victoria, Coraline had regularly complained about being held back by my contentment with our middle-class lifestyle. She made it sound like you were some kind of anchor dragging her down, Victoria said. I believed her narrative about being married to someone who didn't understand her drive. Victoria had even advised Coraline to focus on her career and not worry about her husband's feelings when opportunities arose. Now she realized she'd been encouraging someone to emotionally abandon their marriage. I'm voting to remove her from the partnership track, Victoria admitted. The board can't trust someone who's been living such an elaborate lie. Even Coraline's closest professional ally had turned against her. The board meeting that ended Coraline's career happened on a gray October morning. I wasn't present, but Thomas filled me in on the details later over drinks. The vote to remove Coraline from her CEO track wasn't even close. 7-1, with only one abstention. The board had lost faith in her judgment, her integrity, and her ability to represent the firm's values. Victoria Walsh had led the discussion, outlining the pattern of deception that had emerged during the divorce proceedings. The financial misconduct, the inappropriate relationship with a competitor's employee, the damage to the firm's reputation from the charity gala incident. How can we promote someone to a partner when we can't trust them to handle their personal affairs professionally? Victoria had asked. When the vote was called, Coraline's fate was sealed in minutes. She was reassigned to a junior position with no path back to leadership. Her salary was cut by 40%, and her corner office was reassigned to someone else. The woman who'd once been the firm's rising star was now a cautionary tale about the consequences of letting personal scandals destroy professional credibility. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a quiet sense that justice had been served. Actions have consequences, even for people who think they're too smart to face them. Sabra's call came at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, 3 months after I'd given her bus fare instead of rent money. Her voice was shaky, desperate in a way that suggested she'd exhausted all other options. "Eldric, please, I know things have been difficult, but I need help," she began. I let her talk without interruption. She'd been evicted from her apartment, was staying on friends' couches, and had finally realized that Coraline couldn't support her anymore. Her mother in Oregon had refused to take her in permanently. "I made mistakes," she admitted. "I said things I shouldn't have said. But I'm family, right? We can work through this." There was a long pause after she finished her plea. I could hear her breathing, waiting for me to respond with the generosity I'd shown her for years. "Sabra," I said calmly, "you call me a placeholder. You told me I was lucky that Coraline had someone better. You mocked my role in her life and celebrated the idea of my marriage ending." "I was drunk," she protested. "I didn't mean it." "Yes, you did. Drunk words are sober thoughts. And your sober thought was that I didn't matter." I hung up while she was mid-sentence and blocked her number immediately. Some bridges, once burned, should never be rebuilt. Our 16th anniversary fell on a Tuesday in April. I made reservations at Romano's, the same restaurant where Coraline had canceled on me the year before. I arrived alone, wearing the same tie I'd worn that night when everything began to unravel. The hostess seated me at a table for 2, but I didn't mind the empty chair across from me. The wine was excellent, a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough, the anniversary of my awakening, the night I'd stopped being a placeholder in my own life. I thought about Coraline, probably sitting in her small apartment, dealing with the consequences of her choices. Her career was in ruins, her relationship with Harlan was over, and her sister had finally learned that actions have consequences. Part of me wondered if she thought about me on this day, if she remembered the anniversary she'd canceled for urgent business that turned out to be another man. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the man I'd been, naive, trusting, content to be invisible. He'd served his purpose, but he was gone now. The man sitting in his place knew his worth and demanded others recognize it too. Coraline's media campaign began 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized. She'd apparently decided that public sympathy might restore her reputation and career prospects. Local news stations suddenly had a story about a successful businesswoman whose husband had financially abused her during their divorce. She painted herself as a victim of a vindictive man who destroyed her career out of spite. The narrative might have worked if not for the evidence Leora had carefully preserved. When reporters started asking questions, we released carefully edited portions of the recordings, financial documents, and testimonies that told the real story. Sabra's drunken confession about the placeholder husband made headlines. The charity gala incident was described in detail by witnesses. Victoria Walsh gave an interview about Coraline's pattern of deception and poor judgment. Instead of generating sympathy, Coraline's media blitz backfired spectacularly. She came across as someone trying to rewrite history to avoid accountability for her own choices. The final nail in her credibility coffin was when Harlan Stevens gave his own interview, distancing himself from her and describing their relationship as a professional networking opportunity that was misinterpreted. Even the man she'd betrayed me for was now throwing her under the bus to protect his own reputation. 6 months after our divorce was final, I was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. My architecture firm had landed 3 major contracts, partly because clients respected how I'd handled my personal crisis with dignity. Coraline and Sabra had become cautionary tales in our social circle, examples of what happens when entitlement meets reality. Sabra had finally found a job waiting tables, while Coraline worked at a small marketing firm for half her previous salary. I'd kept the house, the investments, and most of our assets. The court had agreed that her financial misconduct warranted a heavily skewed settlement in my favor. My reputation had not only survived the divorce, but had been enhanced by it. People respected how I'd uncovered the truth methodically and responded strategically rather than emotionally. I was dating again, carefully and selectively. Women seemed drawn to a man who commanded respect and wouldn't tolerate being taken for granted. The placeholder husband was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew his value and insisted others recognize it too. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful that your former enemies become irrelevant to your happiness. The knock on my door came on a cold December evening, 8 months after our divorce was finalized. I wasn't surprised to see Coraline standing on my porch, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside and led her into the living room that had once been ours. She looked around at the changes I'd made, the new furniture and artwork that reflected my taste instead of our former compromise. "I made a mistake," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I threw away 15 years for something that wasn't real." I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse instead of simple regret about consequences. "Harlan never cared about me," she continued. "He was just using me, like you said he would. And Sabra, she only valued me for what I could provide." "I'm sorry you're hurting," I said, and I meant it. "Can we try again? I know I hurt you, but we had something good once. We could have it again." I walked to the door and opened it, cold air rushing into the warm room. "Coraline," I said, looking directly into her eyes for what I knew would be the last time, "I was never your placeholder. You were mine." I closed the door gently but firmly, ending our story the way it should have ended, with me choosing my own worth over her convenience.